A village called Bethany, 2 miles east of Jerusalem, a tomb cut into the rock, a stone rolled across the entrance. 4 days, 2 sisters in the village. One of them went out to meet him when she heard he was on the road. The other one stayed inside. Stayed inside for reasons you already understand if you have ever been the kind of grief that does not want to move. Her name was Mary, and when someone came to tell her that the teacher was asking for her, she got up quickly enough that the people who had come to the house to mourn with her assumed she was going to the tomb to weep. So they followed her. She found him outside the village, and the moment she saw him, she fell at his feet. Same words her sister had already said to him on the road. Same words exactly. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When her sister Martha said them, standing, he gave her a resurrection discourse. Theology, the statement of doctrine that has been carved into cemetery stones for 2,000 years. When Mary said them, on the ground, face down, weeping, he did not answer her at all. He asked where they had laid him, and then he saw the crowd that had followed her. He saw how they were suffering. He saw the grief that grief does to a face, to a posture, to a body. He saw it in Mary and in the people behind her, and something in him broke open. Jesus wept. The shortest verse in the Bible, 2 words in English, 1 word in Greek, edakryson. He shed tears before the miracle. Not because he didn't know what he was about to do. He knew. He had known for 4 days. He wept anyway. Now hold that image, because there were 2 more times. Most people know one of them. It happens in broad daylight, in public, while a crowd is cheering. The other one, the third, weeping, is not in any gospel at all. It is in a letter, written a generation after the fact, and the author doesn't frame it as a weeping scene, but the Greek word is unmistakable, and once you see it, you cannot read that passage the same way again. We will get there. But first, you need to understand what that single Greek word in John chapter 11 actually means, because it is not the same word used the second time, and the difference between the 2 words tells you something about the nature of grief that most people go their whole lives without being told. This is not a video about sadness. This is not a message about managing your emotions or giving yourself permission to feel things. This is not a devotional about tears. This is about what it means, what it actually means with full weight, that the Son of God wept 3 times, never the same way, twice, and what each weeping reveals about who he is. Go back to the beginning of John chapter 11, not to the tomb, earlier, to the moment before Jesus left for Bethany at all. A message had arrived. "Lord, the one you love is sick." That was it. No demand, no instruction, just information offered by 2 sisters who trusted that information alone would be enough to move him. He stayed where he was for 2 more days. By the time he arrived, Lazarus had been in the tomb for 4 days. In Jewish tradition, the soul was believed to linger near the body for 3 days after death, waiting as if undecided. 4 days meant there was no ambiguity, no loophole. He was gone. The smell confirmed it. Martha heard Jesus was on the road and went out to meet him. She did not wait. She was always the one who did not wait, and she said to him, standing on the road with the dust still on her sandals, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died, but I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." There is faith in those words, real faith, the kind that hurts to say, and Jesus responded with one of the most important things he ever said. "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die." He gave her a declaration, a theological statement that has been read at funerals for 2,000 years. He met her faith with doctrine. He met her standing with standing. Then he asked where Mary was. Someone went back to the house and told her quietly, "The teacher is here and is asking for you." And she got up, quickly, the text says, and went to him. The mourners in the house assumed she was going to weep at the tomb, so they followed her. She found him still outside the village, at the same place where Martha had met him, and the moment she saw him, she fell at his feet, face down on the road, not standing, not composing herself first. Same words as Martha, word for word. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Jesus said nothing. He did not give her a resurrection discourse. He did not repeat the doctrine he had just offered her sister. He looked at her, on the ground at his feet, and then at the crowd weeping behind her. And something happened inside him that the Greek text records with a word almost every English translation gets wrong. The word is embrimaomai. Your Bible probably says he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled, or greatly disturbed. These translations are not wrong, but they are soft. Embrimaomai is not a soft word. It is used elsewhere in Greek literature of a horse snorting before battle, of a person trembling with outrage. It carries the force of indignation, of something being deeply, viscerally wrong. Jesus was not simply sad at that tomb. He was angry, not at Mary, not at the mourners, at death itself, at the fact that this happened at all, at the wrongness that had been done to his friend, to these sisters, to every person in that crowd who had loved someone and then stood at a sealed stone and had nothing left to say. He asked where they had laid him. They said, "Come and see," and he wept. The word John uses here is different from embrimaomai. This is dakrio, to shed tears, quietly, privately, the single tear that traces down the face while you are trying to hold yourself together, not a wail, not a cry, the grief that stays mostly on the inside and leaks out through the eyes, and the crowd saw it. "See how he loved him," they said. Some of them asked the question you might have asked. Could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind have kept this man from dying? And John records that Jesus came to the tomb with embrimaomai again, the same word, still angry, still outraged at what death had done to people he loved. Here is what most people miss. It was not Mary's grief that broke him open. If grief alone had been the trigger, he would have wept when Martha said the same words on the road. But with Martha, he taught. The difference was posture. Mary was on the ground. Her grief had taken her knees, and when he saw her there, and saw the crowd that had followed her, all of them carrying the same weight, he did not reach for doctrine. He reached for tears. John Chrysostom, preaching on this passage in the 4th century, asked the obvious question directly. Why does Jesus weep when he already knows he is about to raise Lazarus? He knows the miracle is coming. He knows death has 30 minutes left in this story. So why cry? Chrysostom's answer was this. He wept to show that he partook of our feelings, not to inform God about grief, not because he lacked information. He wept to show us, the ones reading, the ones who will spend our lives standing at tombs and feeling alone in them, that he knows what this is like from the inside. He wept before the miracle, not after. He did not wait until the stone was rolled back and the story had a good ending. He wept while the tomb was still sealed, while the grief was still full, while you were still on the ground. That is the first weeping. Private, quiet, triggered not by his own loss but by watching people he loved suffer theirs. There is a second one, and it sounds nothing like this. So far, one weeping. Private, in front of a sealed tomb, surrounded by mourners, triggered by watching people he loved suffer. He did not wait until the miracle to show up emotionally. He showed up in the middle of the grief, before anything was resolved. The second weeping is nothing like that. It is loud. It is public. It happens while a crowd is cheering his name. And if you have heard the Palm Sunday story before, you have almost certainly heard a version that leaves this part out entirely. Stay with me, because the second word for weeping tells you something the first one doesn't, and you need both. The road from Jericho to Jerusalem climbs for 17 miles through the Judean wilderness. By the time a traveler crests the Mount of Olives, Jerusalem appears suddenly. The whole city visible at once, the Temple Mount rising above everything else, the white limestone catching the light. This is where it happened. Luke chapter 19. The crowd ahead of him had been building for miles. People were throwing their cloaks on the road, cutting palm branches, shouting. The city was beginning to stir. People coming out from the gates to see what the noise was. The disciples were caught up in it. "Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord," they were calling out. "Peace in heaven and glory in the highest." It was the kind of moment that gets remembered, the kind that feels while you are in it, like the turning point of history. And it was, just not in the way the crowd expected. He crested that ridge, the city came into view, and he stopped and wept. The word Luke uses is completely different from John's word at the tomb. This is not dacrio, the quiet private tear. This is kleo. Kleo is the word used for women wailing at funerals, for a father weeping over a dead child. Grief that cannot be contained, that does not stay polite, that comes out audible. Loud enough that the disciples walking beside him heard it. Loud enough that Luke recorded it, because the crowd ahead was still cheering. He was weeping while they were cheering. The Pharisees in the crowd called to him, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." They were embarrassed by the noise of the praise, and he said the stones would cry out if the disciples were silenced. He was not embarrassed by the praise. He was not embarrassed by the tears either. Both were happening at the same time, and he let them. Then he spoke to the city, not to the crowd, to Jerusalem itself, as if the city were a person standing in front of him. "If you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace," already mourning a choice that had not yet been made. "But now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another." He said this while people were throwing palm branches on the road ahead of him. He was looking at people he loved and seeing with perfect clarity what was coming. 40 years later, in AD 70, the Roman general Titus surrounded Jerusalem with 4 legions. The historian Josephus, a Jewish scholar who survived the siege and recorded it in precise detail, described what happened inside the walls. Famine so severe that a woman killed her own child to survive. Bodies piled in the streets, 1.1 million people dead, by Josephus's count, before the city fell. The temple burned. The great limestone blocks the pilgrims had marveled over were pulled down and thrown into the valley below. Not one stone left on another. He had described it, weeping, 40 years before it happened. And here is the part that stops you if you sit with it long enough. He could not stop it. Not because he lacked power. He was 3 days from demonstrating exactly what kind of power he had over death. He wept over Jerusalem not because he was powerless, but because the people he loved were making themselves unreachable. "How often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, and you were not willing." He was not weeping because the situation was beyond his control. He was weeping because the people he loved were beyond his reach. Pay attention to this. The first weeping was private, triggered by grief in front of a sealed tomb, one quiet tear at a time, in the company of mourners. The second weeping was public, on a hillside, audible, in front of a cheering crowd, triggered by something only he could see. 2 completely different kinds of grief, 2 different Greek words, same God, which means there is more than one shape that holy grief can take. the quiet kind that leaks out in front of a tomb, and the loud kind that breaks out on a hillside while everyone around you is celebrating. Both are in the record. Neither one is less than the other. There is one more, and it is the strangest one, the one not in any gospel, the one written down by someone who was not there, but who had heard from people who were. And it is the weeping that changes everything about how you read the other two. Hebrews chapter 5, verse 7. Most people who have read through the New Testament 10 times have passed over this sentence without stopping. It does not read like a weeping scene. There is no tomb, no hillside, no crowd, just a single line in a theological letter tucked between an argument about priesthood and a warning about spiritual immaturity. Here is what it says. During the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with fervent cries and tears to the one who could save him from death, and he was heard because of his reverent submission. Fervent cries and tears. The Greek is kraugas ischaras kai dakrion. Kraugas means cries, the kind that break out of you before you have decided to make them. Ischaras means strong, forceful, with power behind them. The phrase together, strong cries, and then dakrion, tears, plural, more than one. This is Gethsemane. The scholars are nearly unanimous. The author of Hebrews is describing the night before the crucifixion, the garden on the Mount of Olives, the prayer that bent Jesus to the ground. Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done. That prayer, the most honest prayer in the New Testament, was prayed with strong cries and tears, not a whisper, not a composed, reverent petition offered in a quiet voice with hands folded. The disciples were sleeping a stone's throw away. They could have heard it, and a generation later, the author of Hebrews still remembered how it sounded. Strong cries. Now here is what changes when you understand this. You have heard Gethsemane preached before. You have heard it as a story about surrender. Not my will, but yours. And that is true. You have heard it as a story about the cost of obedience. But the author of Hebrews frames it differently. He does not start with the surrender. He starts with the cries. He starts with the tears. He tells you the sound of it before he tells you the outcome. The strong cries came first. The surrender followed them. He had wept twice before in ways people could see. Once privately, beside a tomb he was about to open. Once publicly, on a hillside, over a city he could not save against its own will. But both of those weepings happened in front of people. There was always a crowd, always a witness. This time he was alone. The disciples were asleep. The city was quiet. There was no one to weep with. No city to weep over, just a garden and darkness and the weight of what was coming pressing down so hard that Luke's account says his sweat fell like drops of blood, and he prayed with strong cries, with tears, to the one who could save him from death. And this is where it gets remarkable. The author of Hebrews does not say he was heard despite the cries and tears. He says he was heard because of his reverent submission, which means the cries and the tears and the submission were all part of the same thing. The grief was not separate from the prayer. The grief was the prayer. God heard it, not as weakness interrupting faith, but as faith expressing itself in the only language it had left. You know this person. You might be this person right now, the one who has held everyone else together for so long that holding together has become its own kind of habit. The pastor who has sat with 10 families in 10 hospital rooms, wept with every one of them, driven home alone, and been fine. The parent who has kept the fear off their face for the sake of the children. The friend everyone calls in a crisis, who has learned to set their own grief aside because there is always someone who needs them more. They are fine in front of people, and then they find a quiet place, a car, a garden, a room at the end of the hallway, and they are not fine at all. The strongest person who ever lived did exactly that. Face down in a garden. strong cries, tears, alone while the people closest to him slept. And he was heard. Not after he had composed himself. Not once he had worked through it and arrived at a place of peace. He was heard in the middle of the strong cries, while the tears were still on his face before the surrender came. Augustine, writing 4 centuries later, described his own years of grief and resistance before faith finally broke him open. He wrote, "Thou madest us for thyself, and our heart is restless, until it repose in thee." Restless, not composed, not gathered, restless, and heard anyway. The third weeping is the one nobody preaches from the tomb narrative. Nobody includes it in the Palm Sunday account. It sits in a letter, recorded almost as a footnote, by a writer who was not in the garden that night. But the Greek is there. Strong cries, tears, alone. He went to the cross the next morning having prayed that prayer, which means the cross was not endured in spite of the weeping. It was endured after it. The tears came first. 3 weepings, 3 Greek words, 3 completely different moments. Here is what they mean together. The first thing is this: he wept differently each time. At the tomb, a quiet, private tear, dacrio, while mourners stood around him. On the hillside, a loud public wail, clio, while worshippers stood around him. In the garden, strong cries and tears alone, while no one was awake to witness it. 3 valid shapes for grief, 3 different kinds of suffering, and he showed up for all 3 differently, in the way each one required, which means there is no wrong shape for yours. The second thing, he did not wait until people were fine to weep with them. At the tomb, the miracle was already decided before he arrived. He knew. He wept before the stone was rolled back, not after. He wept while the grief was still full, while the tomb was still sealed, while Mary was still on the ground at his feet. Which means his presence with you in the middle of your worst moment is not a doctrine. It is documented behavior. He showed up in the pain before he fixed it. The third thing, and this is the one I want you to carry out of here, the last weeping in the record is a man alone in a garden the night before he died, praying so hard and so loud that a writer a generation later still remembered the sound of it. Strong cries. That is not a man who had it together. That is a man who was coming apart in the presence of God, and who was heard because of it, not in spite of it, which means God can hear you when you are coming apart too, not later, not once you have found the right words or the right posture or the right amount of faith. Now, in the middle of it, while the cries are still strong and the tears are still